This is Ella Cerrone reporting for James Cole. Today's topic is choose a sacrifice in line with who you are. Be true to yourself. And so I actually want to start this off by talking a little bit. I know you majored in photography, for all intents and purposes majored because I think you also mentioned that at Princeton it works a little differently, but that you majored in photography. Did you always know that you wanted to do something with photography?
I think it was one of the first things that I actually felt connected to. I got a camera for my graduation present when I was in high school. So I guess I took classes in high school using one of my mom's old film cameras and then got my own as a gift when I was 18. And sort of fell in love with it and got really into like I love people, I love stories. So it was one of the first things I fell in love with. So it was definitely one of the first times I felt like a spike of connection to something. Um, but then at Princeton, it sort of morphed into something else, which was at Princeton, at some schools, you can write a thesis if you'd like to graduate with honors. At Princeton, you have to write a thesis to graduate, period. Um, with only a few exceptions, maybe only one exception, I think 2 students a year out of a class of 1,200 do not have to write a thesis. And I'm one of them because I was majoring in photography and visual arts. I could do a visual thesis. So it felt like a nice loophole. And it was very competitive. You had to apply to get in. I think 15 or 20 people applied and they only gave out 2 spots. So I got it, but thereafter it was like sort of a path of least resistance, which I now sort of try to choose paths of most resistance in my life. Um, so for me, photography was just something that I had a natural aptitude for, and I chose it because I liked it, but also because it meant that I would do the least amount of work.
That's really interesting. The least resistance to most resistance. Was there just something about that process of realizing that you didn't really have to try that made you realize that you wanted to try?
Not that immediately. I mean, I think like it didn't go as planned, partially for partially because I think the path of least resistance isn't good for your soul, but partially just for externalities. The department wasn't a very good department. There was a lot of intensity and drama that was sort of had nothing to do with me. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience. But yeah, I think generally in life we think that doing the easy thing, because that's what our brain tells us at any given moment, like choose the easy path, don't go for the run, don't do the hard thing, don't have the hard conversation. Like that's where we're always drawn. And if you constantly make that decision, the easiest decision, you're left, I think, worse for the wear, like emotionally and physically softer than you could or should be. And so then when real difficulty besets you, you have no training. It'd be like trying to go and race a mile after never, like always deciding not to run. Um, the same thing happens emotionally, where if you've always chosen the easiest path, when a hard path comes to you, you have no means of you have no mechanisms, no protocols to face the challenge.
And then I'm curious, I know that you started the Hub after trying a number of other traditional jobs, but what about the idea for the Hub, which is still very much tied to photography? Like, did you see some sort of linear progression there?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to be a photographer both in college, but then I also during college over my summers, I worked as a photographer at a newspaper in Hong Kong, and I basically apprenticed for a very accomplished photographer in New York City for a whole summer. And through those two experiences, realized like, A, I don't think I'm good enough to make a career of this, because only, as being a writer, like only a chosen few really get to make a real career at it. And I didn't think I was good enough for it. And also, I didn't know that I had the deep passion for photography proper. So I went into advertising, which was my way of saying, okay, like I know that I'm creative, but maybe I can apply it to like a different arena and that will work a bit better. And found that to be very disappointing because advertising isn't the high dynamism, creativity, staying up until 11 p.m. because you're passionate about an idea working thing that I hoped it would be. It was more like a lot of people working 9 to 5 and kind of meh about their job, coming up with campaigns for huge corporates that didn't really give a shit. It was a lot of people a lot of apathy, a lot of ambivalence. And so then I left, joined a startup, and at that startup had the beginnings of like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then the startup just started completely failing. And it was in that moment that I could have like put my tail between my legs or walked away or blamed it on the failing startup and quit. But I was so new that I just stayed. And I kind of found this inner, it's always dangerous to make these sort of analogies, but this inner firefighter. Or one of my cousins is in the military and they talk about running towards the gun blast, not away from it, right? And like when the company was burning, I had this just inexplicable urge to like run towards the problem and try to help and fix it as opposed to run away. And so I got to flex the muscle, and it was very weak, atrophied muscle, but work on this entrepreneurial muscle for the first time ever, and found a lot of satisfaction in that.
I'm just curious then, why, when you were doing this and trying, why the photography? Like, why did it just all click for you? Did it feel like back at home?
The founder of the startup that I was just talking about had seen videos and photos, mostly videos that I'd made in college. We'd known each other through other means. He was in finance and covered advertising, and I was in advertising, so we knew each other that way. And when we'd meet, I'd show him. He was maybe 15 years older than I am, and I'd show him some of the stuff I was working on, just some of the stuff I was creating. And so he brought me in to create all the original content for the company. So I went from like being a photographer to working in advertising to sort of wedding the two, like knowing strategic, like branding a startup and knowing, I created their first ever real ad campaign, the startup. And I created everything myself, but I also strategically came up with the idea. So sort of the wedding of my photographic training and my advertising training.
And then how did that spawn off into the hub?
Well, I made the campaign, which was sort of hub-like, because we were trying to, keep costs down. The app had 40 million users, the one that I was working at, 8 million weekly active users, which is a ton. I mean, that's a big app, 8 million people using it every week. So I figured instead of hiring other people, we would just use that user base. So I had thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of footage and hired a whole army of people to go through it and pull out the best stuff and pull out the best stuff. And then I went through maybe 100 hours and cut it down into 2 minutes. I worked with a sound designer that I love, and his firstborn child, his wife was in the hospital with some complications with his firstborn. And I was like, dude, let me give the project to someone else. Like, you need to be there for your wife and whatever. And he's like, no, I'll make it work. And he brought his recording equipment to the hospital. And when they take her in, what is it called when you put the jelly on the belly and listen to the heartbeat? What is that called?
An ultrasound.
An ultrasound. So when they do ultrasounds and various other things to see how the baby was doing, he would record the like the heartbeat and all sorts of other noises. And he ended up working in a lot of those noises into the sound for the ad campaign, which was called Love Yourself. So it's pretty cool because his kid is now 5 years old, and his unborn baby's heartbeat was the sort of beat of the music that he ended up making for this ad about how important self-love was on the platform that we were creating. It was really beautiful. So it started there with thousands of mostly young women submitting videos and then cutting it together into a campaign and realizing the power of a disparate group of people coming together. And then when the company, basically the company had raised money called convertible debt. It's a finance instrument that's used by startups quite frequently. And the debt got pulled, which means the investor basically has the right to take the money back if they don't like the direction of the company. So $1.2 million got pulled back 8 weeks into me being at the company, and half the company was fired. And all my budgets were cut, and the team that I was promised was cut, and everything was cut. And so I sort of used that idea of having a disparate group of people create a large body of content and started reaching out to people online, on social media, friends of mine, and created all my content for pennies, and could create hundreds of things, for very, very cheap. And that was sort of the beginning of the hub. It was this idea that like there are so many talented people, and many of them not in a predatory way. They just, they have other jobs. They work at Starbucks, and they'd be thrilled to make $200 making a video or doing a photo shoot or whatever. And you can create a lot of really amazing content and tell amazing stories through the power of people. And so, Ella, one of the things that I came to realize is that advertising is usually told from the top down. It's a boardroom of people, very few, and then it reaches millions through media, through a TV ad or through a print ad. Millions of people see it. But what if you could invert that and have the big be at the top? So have all the people tell the story to build the brand. And that was sort of an interesting flip for me. Like, let's not just have a few people tell a story to reach many. Let's have many tell a story to build one brand.
I'm curious, so to go back to this overarching topic of choosing the sacrifice in line with who you are, how does, and I'm sorry that Olive is not being loud, but how do you think this is your sacrifice? Why does this resonate with you?
One of my, he's not really a mentor, but one of my like brothers in arms, he was one of the first founders that was like really accomplished that I actually didn't just sort of, know, but actually got really close to, said that the most interesting people solve the same problem again and again and again and again, as if they can't quite figure it out. And I think that's been me, with that Love Yourself campaign, and We Heart It, and then the hub, and then what I hope to do after this. It's just using the power of many to help the individual. I think that's or the power of the individual to help many. It's that tension. It's like, how can I as one person really affect as many people as possible? And how can a chorus of voices really tell the story of one brand, or really tell one story? I like that tension.
And why do you like it particularly in the framework of calling it a sacrifice as opposed to like a calling or anything else?
I mean, this isn't really my thinking, but I really like Jordan Peterson, as I've said, and he talks about how life is filled with benevolence. Like, bad shit happens. Life is challenging. You get, Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. We all get punched in the mouth, like in little ways or big ways, whether you lose a romantic partner or a job, or you're just having a rough week, or you have a little depression, or you lose a loved one, or, my grandmother just died this weekend. I had a few challenges at work last week. There are a million little things and big things that happen to all of us all the time. So I don't think that if you give yourself fully to something and work really hard at something, It's never going to be all sunshine and rainbows, A. And B, getting back to the path of least resistance from vis-a-vis the path of most resistance. You should be so lucky that it is a path of most resistance, that you have a challenge, that you know, Jordan Peterson says we are beasts of burden, right? Like we are designed, we are meant, our souls are meant to carry burdens. You know, if you have a challenge worthy of your strengths, then you have something to strive for, and that gives you purpose, and purpose gives you happiness. If everything's just easy, you know, I was reading another book recently, and it's like utopias don't have any problems. And without problems, there's no need to do anything. And without a need to do anything, there's no purpose. And with no purpose, there's no happiness. So who would want to live in a utopia? So we all have to sacrifice, you know, we all have to focus on something and work through challenges.
How do you motivate yourself to keep going through this path of most resistance?
I think it's this inversion, you know, and again, Ella, these are all the thoughts I'm weaving together from other people. So I just want to keep qualifying that none of this in and of itself is my thinking. Hopefully the fabric, the woven mixture is, but David Goggins, who's a Navy SEAL I like a lot, talks about callousing your mind. And I can't remember if you and I have spoken about this, but we've learned that when your lungs sting on a run because you haven't gone on a run in a while, you tell yourself you're getting in shape. This is a good thing, even though quite objectively your body feels really awful. Like if you were sitting on the couch and felt that way, you'd go to the hospital. Or if you're in the gym and you're lifting heavy weights, you know, you feel wobbly and gross, and it's a pretty objectively awful thing. But societally, we've just established that those are good, you know, no pain, no gain. And it's the same thing with emotional strife. It's the same thing with challenges, that to be administered a challenge and then to face it and hopefully beat it is to callous and strengthen yourself so that you can take on a larger challenge and a larger challenge. My grandfather used to say, you know, you should be so lucky as to hit the fastest pitching you can. And what he meant by that was get in front of better and better and better and better pitchers, and like try to challenge yourself to try to hit the fastest balls that you possibly can get in front of until you miss. So I think it's just this inversion of like, to be challenged, to experience pain, whether it's physical or mental, is actually getting you in shape. It's bettering you for the bigger challenges that lie ahead. So you should celebrate it when it rains and go running anyway, is what Goggins says. You know, you should, when you face challenges in your emotional life, you should celebrate that pain and find a way to work through it, because you know that you're forging a stronger version of yourself for the next set of challenges.
I'm curious. I know that you do some work, whether it's mentoring or, you know, doing outreach and staying in touch with the Princeton community, or just talking with other entrepreneurs as they're on their own pathways. Do you see any stumble points that they're doing in which they're trying to go for the path of least resistance, or they want the easy way out, or they think that they found like the eureka?
Yeah, this isn't politically some kid asked me a question. I thought he was a genius. He was like 15 on I was giving a talk. It turns out I read a book later, and the question was in the book. So he must have just read the book. And the question was, what belief do you hold core to your worldview that most people would disagree with? And my belief is that anyone can put themselves on a continuum to get better, and anyone can feel fulfillment. And one woman's fulfillment is where another woman is starting, and vice versa. In other words, you might claw your whole life to get someplace where someone was born into that. And so it's not about where you're getting in an absolute sense. It's just about improving, and that we all have that capacity. And I think something that has entered our lexicon societally, particularly on the left, which I think is quite detrimental to the individual, is that there are lots of ways, you know, there is there are people who are lower in the social hierarchy, and that there are people that are holding, or things that are holding them down. And while that may certainly be true on an individual level, you have the capacity to rise up. Again, it might not be to become president or to become a billionaire or to make the Olympic team, but you can certainly progress along a continuum. And so I think not letting whatever besets you, you know, for me, it's depression. For someone else, it could be money. For someone else, it could be race. For someone else, it could be obesity. You know, there are a million things that hold us down, but not letting those things become an excuse for you to hide, but instead use them as fuel to create a continuum along which to progress. I think that's really important.
And then also the second part of the topic today, be true to yourself. What does being true to yourself mean for you?
Well, again, you have to, you know, really look in the mirror, um, and audit. What am I good at? What am I bad at? What brings me energy? What doesn't? What, you know, who am I? What am I all about really? And then learn to love all of that person and accept all of that person without throwing away part of it, and wanting only to keep part of it. You know, again, a big thing in cognitive behavioral therapy is, what does that say about you? Um, my therapist was just telling a story about one of her other patients, who obviously she always keeps anonymous. She said that he's very shy and has always wanted to have a romantic partner, and he finally found someone that he wanted to be with, and they didn't share the feelings, and it was a huge setback. But what does that say about you? Well, it says that you've decided that you value intimacy. You've decided that you value a close romantic relationship, and that you want to be vulnerable, and that you want to share your life with someone. Isn't that beautiful? um, so learning to cognitively reframe setbacks as like, you know, okay, well, what does that say? What is that ugliness about you, that you're too sensitive, or that you wanted something really badly? What does that say about you? It says that you care, that you're. So for me, it was just about looking at myself, finding the things that I'd previously thought were negative, and trying to reframe them and ask what they say about me that I'm actually proud of. And for me, a lot of those things have to do with sensitivity, caring a lot what other people think, um, deep empathy, um, sensitivity that turns to combativeness. You know, if I feel someone has wronged me, or someone I love, I want to avenge them. I want to go after them. You know, I'm a very emotional guy, and that's gotten me into trouble plenty of times. But what does that say about me that's beautiful? It says that I really care. I connect to others. I connect to experiences. And that's when you look at the hub, or you look at the Love Yourself campaign, or you look at the thing I want to do next around happiness, that's the beautiful birth of a very empathic, sensitive guy trying to shine his light into the world. It's me coming to terms with who I am and trying to share that, instead of letting it defeat me.
You touched on this a bit before with your friend who was on Wall Street and was a little ostracized for his sensitivity. And I'm curious too if you've kind of seen that manifest in your own life, and how you stay true to your own sensitivity in a world that, quite frankly, demonizes it in men.
Um, I think I've shared this with you before. I'm a big fan of like turning the light on the boogeyman. Um, my cognitive behavioral therapist always goes, and you know, you feel really strongly about something, or something really affects you, and you're embarrassed about how strongly you feel about it. It's like, okay. Um, So I like taking the power away from situations and not keeping anything a secret. Like anything that I'm feeling very deeply, very strongly, I've learned how to calmly express it. You never want to be frantic or to put a burden on other people, but at the right time and the right way, sharing with the relevant parties how you're feeling and not being embarrassed about it in the slightest. Like there's nothing you could ask me, Ella. There's nothing about myself that I wouldn't share. Whether it has to do with depression or whether it has to do with my insecurities or my family situation or the money I come from or like just being okay with who you are as you are. Um, and being willing to talk about anything and share your feelings as they arise, it takes the teeth out of it. You don't have to feel embarrassed about it anymore. So that's been a big one for me.
Is there anything else about just choosing the sacrifices and staying true to yourself that we haven't covered that you would want in this session?
I think it's just the process. It's like really do the work to understand what you're all about, understand the elements of yourself that you love the most or you think define you the most or make you the most unique, and then put yourself into rooms where those are viewed as superpowers. Again, the past couple of sessions we've spoken about X-Men, and it's like you can look at any trait and in the wrong room, there's some stupid thing where they say like don't judge a goldfish on how it climbs a tree. Like if you're judged on the wrong um if you put yourself in the wrong rooms, even the greatest strengths will be viewed as weaknesses. And if you put yourself in the right rooms, even the would be largest weaknesses can be viewed as strengths. So it's just about identifying your life force and then putting yourself in rooms where that life force is considered an overwhelming strength and not an overwhelming weakness.